Welcome to As a Matter of Faith, brought to you by Altered States, an internet ministry dedicated to beginning the weekday with good news and inspiration from the gospel. I am your host, Preacher Bob. When your garden starts to look more like a natural area than a cultivated garden, whose fault is that? Well, on the one hand, it's not your fault, my fault, or anybody's fault, for the very simple reason that weeds are natural products of the environment and so just a part of life. On the other hand, however, one can either by intent or negligence allow weeds to overtake a garden. If that's the case, then there's really nobody to blame but yourself. In the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus relates the parable of the wheat and the tares, in which the weeds have overtaken the wheat. The farmer worked hard planting good seed, anticipating a harvest, but then once the seeds began to sprout and grow, it was discovered that weeds had been surreptitiously sown among the wheat. The farmer's servants inquired of him as to where the fault lay. "We know you planted good wheat seed in the field, so where did all these weeds come from?" The farmer answers without any hesitation and without pulling any punches. He says an enemy did this. It wasn't the farmer's fault that weeds were growing in the field. He hadn't planted them. Rather, it was an enemy, someone determined to ruin the farmer's crop. Now, on a spiritual level, we can make the same inquiry as the farmer's servants in the story of Jesus. Whose fault is it that these weeds are in the world? In a sense, the answer is partly the same. When God created the universe, He gave it the ability to create itself, that is, to replicate and evolve. He then called what He created good, not perfect. Weeds are a natural part of this imperfect world, so their presence isn't my fault, your fault, or anybody else's fault. The alternate part of the answer is also the same. An enemy did this. The enemy, as the cartoon figure Pogo once said, "We have seen the enemy and he is us." Through the God-given gift of choice, we can elect to neglect or even intentionally sabotage the good work that God has in store for us. The worst part of that is that we can become so blinded by our own weediness that we're unaware of any other way of life. And that's when Jesus comes to clear our sight, so with His presence we can recognize our plight and simultaneously our helplessness to change it on our own. Not only does Christ forgive our past failings and misjudgments and bad behavior, but He also empowers us to construct a spiritual garden in which the real fruit of righteousness can grow. So when we see weeds in the world, or we perceive that they've invaded our lives, don't blame God. As a matter of faith, remember that God is not their source, but He is their remedy. Give thanks today that with you in mind, God sent Jesus into the world to overcome all the weeds.